This is Remote Ruby.
Have you any remote idea to the meaning of the word?
Hello, fellow Rubyers. Rubyists.
Yo. JavaScript developers in the house.
I was thinking about what we'd talk about before we hopped on Zoom, and I was like, oh, I wonder if we could challenge ourselves to like go a whole episode without talking about JavaScript. And then when we got on, it was like, what's there to talk about? I was like, well, Turbo released. And that's about it. So
Frickin' JavaScript.
Yep.
This is like a swear word. We're going to make like the jar. If you say JavaScript, you got to throw it in the jar. Let's try this.
no, not
going to last long.
Damn, I'm trying to make some money here. All right, let's talk about Turbo.
I mean, yeah, let's talk about it. So version 7, the main thing, no alpha, no beta, no RC. It's out.
Yeah. Final version-ish, but immediately after there's like a bug in Safari. And so I imagine there will be 7.0.1 out pretty quick.
It's just like that Rails release 1, RC1, 3 minutes later, RC2.
Yep.
So I feel like this, we can get into like the specifics of it a little bit, but I feel like this like inches us closer to the Rails 7. I know we're already in an alpha right now, but surely this gets us even closer to Rails 7.
Yeah, should be. Again, like I wish there was a public kind of like, here's all the blockers that are keeping us from Rails 7, but it's real close. I like went through the other day and moved all of the GoRails CSS and JavaScript from Webpacker into CSS and JS bundling, and it went pretty smooth, except for like, what was it? There was something really dumb that I did that was like the manifest wasn't including the right folder or something like that I like couldn't find this file or whatever, and it just was like not work. Oh, that's what it was. I had Tailwind, and then I forgot the post CSS flag, and I was like, why are my imports just like straight imports? Like they're not actually including any of the contents. And I spent like a tired half hour or something on that and went to bed. And then in the morning I was like, oh wow, like forgot the flag. Can't tell you how many times I've done things like that.
I'm sure how much time is 30 minutes of Chris Oliver's time to my time. There's definitely like a 3x multiplier at least.
Yeah. So I did run into something interesting a little bit ago with it, where GoRails is set up with Uglifier on the asset pipeline. And apparently that does not fully support some features right now. Like version 4.2 just gives you an Uglifier like parse error with no message and doesn't really tell you anything. And if you go back to 4.1, it works. So there's currently there's an open ticket for it, but it's been like an open ticket for a while now. So that I don't think is really even needed probably anymore, because ES Build's probably going to take care of everything I need for that, I would assume. I don't even know that it's worth keeping Uglifier in there. So I may just remove that, but I try to deploy and then everything works in development, and then, okay, production's apparently different somewhere. And then this time it turned out to be an Uglifier. So yeah.
What an ugly experience.
That's the ugly thing you had to go through.
Yeah, it was pretty much the ugliest part of my day.
I love what we just did there. I guess thanks for tuning in. Uglifier is the only option, right, for the JS compression in Rails? Question mark? Because like the JavaScript you use is Terzer.
Yeah, it's like a configurable option in Rails, so you could build your own. I'm sure you could do anything else you wanted there. I had next to that line in my production.rb environment, it was the CSS comment or CSS like compressor was Sass, and I was like, that's funny. So deleted that because it's nice not to be using Sass now and just straight post CSS, and everything is nice and modular and flexible there.
There is one thing that I forgot about talking about, like Sass reminded me of it. What is this like what is it called? The new Sprockets replacement, essentially.
Propshaft.
Oh, yeah.
Propshaft.
What is that?
I think that came out since we talked last.
It did. I haven't really looked into it, but it's
a
super minimal. Yeah.
Is it-
Rails/Propshaft.
Oh, it's okay.
But it's an asset pipeline, more or less. But basically, it's designed around like what does it not do? Whereas Sprockets kind of does everything, and you can run CoffeeScript and Sass and whatever else. This is pretty much just like hey, we're going to digest it and put a hash at the end and serve it up. That's
the vibe I got.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I guess with all the like CSS bundling and JS bundling, we're really just spitting out files that are ready to go. We just need to digest them.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's all I'm doing in the asset pipeline for stuff anymore. So Propshaft could be a good option, although I don't think I'm going to use it because I want, like in Jumpstart Pro, I want people to be able to use Sass. So like, I don't really want to switch to Propshaft and then you got to go switch it back. I don't know of, as long as the asset pipeline does all the stuff it needs to do correctly, which seems like it, then I think I'm just going to keep using it. But Propshaft's probably a tiny bit faster or whatever for stuff.
I wonder how Propshaft handles the old image stuff, or if it does. Or it's like, are we supposed to run
You mean
that through?
like images and putting like them in your CSS as like a URL, or
like the asset?
Just like assets, images. Is it still like?
It should.
There's a CSS asset URLs compiler, which just input.gsub asset path. Oh my God, there's a gnarly little method here. It looks like it takes your config and like puts it correctly to find the correct asset path. I don't know if that's what you're referring to.
So you remember like when you wrote CSS in the asset pipeline and you would, instead of doing a URL, because you didn't know the SHA that would be in production that was generated, that was like gsub for you in Sprockets. So like that feature is added back, which is cool. It's like a one gsub and a one line in a block. So it's super short, which is nice. So
I see it here.
Basically that's, I mean, if you're talking about, if I throw images in or fonts or whatever in the Propshaft folder, it should take every single file because it doesn't care if it's an image or any file type. It doesn't really care. It just wants to go and digest the contents and give you a hash back for that file name. So it's the same one as before or a new one. And then that was really the only like trick to the CSS where, and maybe even the JavaScript or whatever, like if you ever reference an image or some file like a font even, and maybe you don't put those through that. Maybe their fonts have to go through just a public folder or something, which your fonts aren't likely to change. But It's just that dynamic SHA that it has to replace in your files. So
it was like the image tag is what I was thinking of, just throwing it in like an ERB file. And yeah, I see all that. I see asset path, image tag, JavaScript include tag. So, and all the other asset helper tags is what the docs say. So cool.
Yeah.
I think one thing that we've never discussed, and I'm sure many people know, but of why you actually need those hashes at the end. I mean, I can do it unless you got a better way to do it, Chris.
Drop it.
Let's hear it.
It's all about caching, right? So when you're...
No, you're fine. Got him.
Oh my God. Let's try this again. Ooh, bad vibes. Now, when you deploy your application to production, if you don't have any asset hashes, what the browsers are going to do is try to go through and cache all of the files that you have. Now, the easiest way to see this happening is with your fave icons. It'll go through and cache the fave icons. So sometimes you're on localhost and it's using the fave icon of something else. And that's because of the way the browser caches things that don't, or the way it caches it based on file name. So the purpose of adding the hash is that every time it bundles, we want to make sure that it uses the correct up-to-date version of the styles to request from the browser. So maybe Rails does this. It does it based on the type of file, it will create a specific matcher for it. so that if your files don't actually change, it can keep that file cached in the browser. But as soon as you deploy with a change in a different hash, the browser will then be like, oh, it's requesting this different file that I don't know about already. I'll go refetch the new one. And that way you can keep things like your fonts and your images and whatever else you have, especially for fonts, because those can be pretty hefty. That keeps them cached in the browser for as long as possible so that every time you deploy, your users get the right versions of things, and that when you deploy, you get the up-to-date version of what you want.
Yeah. And that also is useful on a CDN level where you might configure your assets to go through some CDN. Those can also be cached forever on the CDN, and then that gets automatically updated. So it definitely was more of a pain when some of the older browsers and stuff would too aggressively cache files or whatever. And this definitely, like, the URL is totally different. So you're not going to have any risk of it serving cached content. So yeah, it works well. Did you guys notice Ryan Bates popped his head out and commented on the Propshaft repo?
I saw that.
I love it.
Out of nowhere. And I was like, I just went and like traced everything down where he had talked in GitHub. I was like, Ryan.
He's alive.
I see Ryan, I become a stalker. I start investigating, like, what else is he doing?
Not only is he still using Rails, he's like keeping up with Rails. That's cool.
Yeah.
Ryan, if you ever listen to this, we've tried to contact you before. We don't know how, but we would love for you to come on this show.
Mm-hmm. We've said this before in the past. When he resurfaced for the whole DigitalOcean fiasco, we were like, hey, just in case you listen to this podcast.
If someone
anyone
knows
you know
Ryan
does.
And wants to pass along, we would just be
ecstatic.
Over the moon.
Yeah.
It would be it's like the dream guest. Like the unattainable one.
Wait, Y is probably the most unattainable one.
That's a very
most
unattainable.
Guest, but
bet. Oh, is this a competition?
Those are our two big goals for the podcast now.
I don't know.
Do we wrap it up after that? Like,
yeah,
put like a bouncy out. Like, find this person for us.
Yeah, like we interview the people who disappeared from the community, and then we disappear with them.
Oh, that's nice and ominous. I like that.
So I haven't kept up much with Hotwire, but I'm about to start more because we're actually starting to use it at Podium. What are some of the things from its release until like its official release now? So I guess like the last 7-8 months that are noteworthy that you would say?
Ooh, I mean, a lot of it's been kind of like bug fix things, I think. I don't know that there's anything like major since the beginning. Stimulus 3 came out and has default values now and a few other like really nice goodies. So like that's a big one. If you're using Stimulus, then now have a bunch of niceties. And there was like the class stuff now takes and automatically splits the CSS classes into an array for you. That's cool. If you're using Tailwind or whatever, and you need to work with multiple classes that get added and removed to things, then it is much nicer. Because I was doing that myself, splitting it, and then it was fine. It's just nicer now. But, I think for the most part, all of that stuff from Hotwire to high level is all basically the same. Lots of little improvements since day one, but you're still talking your turbo stream events. There's now the ability to like select, instead of just a single item with an ID, you can do a class and select multiple. So if you want to like apply a change to a bunch of things on the page, you can do that. But they're all just kind of like little quality of life changes, not anything major, like a brand new feature kind of thing. One may be that like, I haven't totally kept up on this, but I think one of the things where I was like, Hotwire's great, but there's still a couple features of Rails, UJS, like data confirm and data disable with that I still need those and want those. I don't know that necessarily all of those are solved yet, but I think that has definitely been in the conversations, but I don't think they've quite been solved. And then do we even use the browser's confirm anymore? Do we use a stimulus controller that runs asynchronously and stuff? Because the browser one like blocks the page and all that with an alert, like native modal thing. And a lot of people do, your application that you're building for work, you'd never ever want the browser's native modal. You want like a nice, pretty modal inside your app. So it's not even really a good solution, right?
As someone who did this, I object. I knew it was bad. I knew it was a sin. I did it anyway. Now I have to. You just triggered me.
The Stimulus 3 stuff, that is some good stuff. And it was like really, compared to how long there was between 1 and 2, the 2 to 3 upgrade for Stimulus was much quicker, like in terms of just being released. But the ability to, the callbacks on targets, I could see like that opening up just a world of stuff.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's right. Explain that so people know.
Yeah. So if I understand it correctly, there are now, I'm going to pull it up so I don't misspeak, but there are like so with Stimulus, you have targets on a controller, and now you can listen for those targets like connecting and disconnecting, much like you would like an actual controller. And so let's see here. So connected and disconnected callback. So basically it's just, you can define a function, item target connected or disconnected. So like there's a lot of times I'll have a controller that wraps like a list, right? A list in a very broad sense. And so I'll have like a list controller for each one. And I could see certain things of like, a lot of times it's just like when this item in the list appears, do something. And so now having item target connected, I think it's going to be clutch. So, and maybe cut down some controllers.
That'd be nice. The new Stimulus package, I think, was the one that now it's sort of just the wrapper around the hot-wired Stimulus package. So you like, I don't remember if you can still import exactly the same, because that was something that broke on Madmin the other day when that got released. So the import controller from Stimulus no longer worked, and I had to switch it to the hot-wired Stimulus. And I know Connor had like an example snippet how to import that, or Adrian Polly was maybe the one that posted that was, here's the new way to kind of make it use the new package, but keep it so that you can still import stuff consistently without like importing Stimulus 2 times or 10 times.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I saw an issue about that. I think maybe like, there wasn't an issue. I think I saw Least Bad comment on it asking for that not to happen.
Yeah.
Probably for the situation like you were talking about, but I guess it went through.
It's solvable. You got to update your packages or whatever. It is what it is. It's probably good that things are under the hot-wired namespace and kind of organized there nicely. But I think one of the weird things for me still is that importing files with the ES build stuff requires like the relative path for local files. And I'm so used to just importing the file and assuming that it's in whatever directory. But I have to say it is nice to actually have that being explicit in your imports so that you know exactly what's being pulled from node modules and what's being pulled from your local directory. I think that was a nice, subtle change, but a nice one.
We just updated that at Podia, but for unrelated reasons. VS Code is really smart about like JavaScript tooling. VS Code's amazing at JavaScript. And so if you import a file like that and you change its location, if you're using the like explicit paths, then it'll be like, do you want to go update all 45,000 references to it? And then it'll just go update all the files like to update the paths. But you don't get that if you use the like implicit version of it.
VS Code is awesome.
I'm still a bit blown away by some of the GitHub Copilot suggestions. They are scary accurate sometimes. More scary accurate when you're doing something repetitive, but still, it is awesome.
Well, it's nice because it knows what Rubocops I want to disable. I just type, I'm like, oh, this stupid Rubocop, I don't care about you. And I hit the pound sign, and then it's like, here you go. It's just disable. We already knew you probably wanted to disable this. Yes.
I was watching Andrea use it the other day, and like the first thing it did was like, I was like, no, that's wrong. But then everything after that, like it got 3 in a row, 3 separate lines, just nailed them after like a couple of keystrokes. And I was like, Oh my God. What?
Yeah. Just don't let your boss know, because then they can just start doing your work for you. Just autocomplete.
That's fine with me.
I wish Jira could get an autocomplete.
That would be cool. You wire it up to your issue tracking, and then it'll like suggest a PR for you. You just gotta go edit it.
The Jira Plus Copilot. Oh my God. As long as no one knows about it, this could be amazing.
I don't know of much, at least this week, to chat about in terms of Ruby.
I had an interesting thing today. So I'm fixing a few things with madmin. Wrote some integration tests on Rails 6.1. They all run just fine. And I push it up to the repo, and CI runs on Rails 6.0 and 7 and whatever. I just, didn't run them all locally. And I noticed that like half the tests are failing. And I was like, this is weird. And what happened was eventually I figure out that one of my controllers, so it's inside the module for madmin, and it's got a base controller, application controller, and like your usual things. But when we copy over the controllers to your application, we inherit explicitly from madmin : like application controller or whatever. One of those references did not include the madmin : in there. And thanks to Xavier being awesome, it just works as you would expect, where it looks up the tree and it's like, okay, there's a application controller inside of the module that we're in, so we'll use that. Then I discovered that the Rails 6 tests were failing because it wasn't doing that. It was looking at the parent application controller, because it was like giving me very strange things. Like one of them was the Pagey backend wasn't available, which is weird because it totally was included in the application controller or whatever. And then I got some other errors that were like, yeah, there is no new HTML ERB. There's no show. None of these views are defined. And I was like, this is really weird. And yeah, sure enough, like forcing the module on that inheritance class solved it for Rails 6. And I was like, this is one of the many reasons why Zeitwork has been amazing to have, is just cleaned up so much of that stuff. And it just works. There was some other Zeitwork related thing that I fixed too. So you know how like the application folder, all of those are auto-loaded and it matches the file name, but then there's exceptions. There's the controllers, or the concerns inside of controllers and models that don't require that concerns prefix on them. So madmin has app madmin resources, and I didn't want to force you to have madmin resource and whatever. And then we also have like custom fields, so you can define them in app madmin fields. And I had found, after some Googling, some example a long time ago of basically, here is a way to do modifying the application's load paths from your gem. And it was some sort of like insert before, add an initializer before this other initializer in Rails and go and modify that. But that stopped working with Rails 7 or like Zeitwork 2.5. I don't know if it was Zeitwork necessarily, but there was a specific commit where it worked before and it didn't afterwards, related to the load paths that Xavier changed in Rails 7.
If you've been listening to the show for a bit, then you know that Jason and Chris have a crush on Laravel, and I basically battle JavaScript for fun. Regardless of what end of the stack and what language, they all have one thing in common, and that's Honeybadger. Stop wasting time configuring your tools and focus on shipping, knowing that no matter where you are, Honeybadger has your back. Oh, and speaking of shipping, the Honeybadger blog has been on fire recently. Seriously, and I don't say this lightly. Some of the best technical writing you're going to find all in one place. So go check that out. And while you're there, sign up for Honeybadger. Let them know he sent you. Thank you so much to Honeybadger for continuing to sponsor Remote Ruby and for not killing me for all the JavaScript errors I sent you this weekend.
Have you guys ever really gone into like the weeds on engines and initializers in them and like the different callbacks?
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
Yes, I have. I'm about to go insane. Yes, I have. It's not fun.
I feel like I spent, and I know that I spent several days kind of learning this stuff in the past and forgot it all. And then had to come back to it. And I was like, oh no, I'm never going to get this figured out in a way that's like reliable or anything without probably asking Xavier himself or somebody. And I definitely spent a good several hours reading through the Rails source code on like, what exactly is the initializers and what order do they run and whatever. And I eventually figured it out. Instead of using an initializer, I should pull up this commit here. I ended up doing a config before configuration block instead. Before I had an initializer that ran before the set auto load paths initializer. And that one like freezes the auto load path. So you have to make sure you run your initializer before it gets frozen. Then that changed and it was like happening a little earlier or something. So I had tried a million things, like all these Stack Overflow posts that were like, yeah, just shovel it on the load paths. And it's like, it's just simply not there when I like do that. So then the new way of doing it is like this before configuration callback, which I don't think I've ever seen before. I've not really ever come across it. Didn't know it exists, but I happened to be poking through the Rails source code and was like, screw it. I'll just try this one too and see what happens. And it worked. So it's kind of cool. But basically the engine now can go modify the Rails apps load paths and like add a folder to that from there. And it's got me wondering too, like, I don't know if there's any difference between the application's load paths and the engine's load paths, if they're like separate groups or not. I don't remember. So I have more to learn on this, but I did get it working. And now I'm like, there's surely a better way.
Question.
Yeah.
So in like a normal Rails app, maybe this isn't true with Zitework anymore. And that's what I'm trying to figure out. If I'm trying to make an initializer go first, I add 01 underscore redis.rb. Is that still like valid? Because I think it was loading them in alphabetical order. And is now that we're using Zitework, it doesn't do that. It just pulls it in when it gets called.
That probably still works, but I was doing an engine initializer. So like,
right.
So that's just like written in the engine, not in a file, not in the initializers folder. So it's like inside my madmin engine that inherits from the Rails engine, not like the config initializers folder. So
well, yeah, that's a good question that you asked though. Then is like, does it load like your initializers and then load madmins, or does it take all of the initializers and do them in a group like you would expect them to? That's a great question. Yeah,
and this is stuff where like the docs do not go into enough. And what you end up doing is like, you go look at, does devise do anything like this? Does like whatever other gem do anything like this? There was some gem that I saw that added some extra folder that was nested or something. That was where I originally had set that up. And it is maybe one of those good places for me to go. And I almost want to just go have a conversation with Xavier or somebody about all of these things at a high level that we could turn into a more thorough doc for the Rails guides or something, because this was complicated to figure out and I'll remember it long enough for that day. But if I sleep on it, I'll kind of pretty quickly forget like the nuances to all this. And then here we are. Like I've already kind of forgotten some of that stuff, but reading the Rails source does give you like the best understanding of it, but yet I don't want to have to go do that. I want to be able to read a doc.
That's been the thing for me really with like engines is like every time I've gone to build one, I like one specific thing like really shoots me in the foot. I can't get myself out of it. So I abandon entire projects like madmin. Yeah. We spent all that time writing that together. And then like, you were like, I just have to start this over.
It's hard. Yeah. Yeah. And I think sort of part of the argument there is probably that like, well, engines are just little Rails apps. So like, they're basically the same. And yeah, they are. But when you are trying to integrate with the parent Rails app, there's things like this that you need to be able to modify. And that is what's not documented. The actual integrating the two, there's enough documentation on like put stuff in the app folders and the config, and it's treated as if it's in the parent. But the actual, I don't know what you call it, the integration or whatever is a lot more needed to make that work well. So, or to understand it, to be able to do that. So
I've been working with engines for the past month or two, and I can't talk about why or what they are, but they're the worst. And
wait, you can't talk about what engines are, or this?
No. I can't talk about. I need to be general about these said engines, but they're chugging. But they're not just shooting me in the foot; they're like unloading the clip because, you know, some gems. I mean, I've seen some engines where they have this pattern where, well, if you need to override because inevitably you have to override something, and that's where it all kind of crumbles when you try to implement it someone else's engine in your app. I think it makes a lot more sense to use engines if it's your team making engines for your apps and sharing them between. But if it's someone else's engine that you're like, then it gets to be a nightmare, because what if you need to override a file, but then the file in the master or main repo of the gem changes? So the next release won't even have that file. And like, how do you efficiently override the files? Like what? And some people have freaking Ruby files with like 100 methods. And you're like, there's no way to override this without pulling in the entire file from GitHub. And then you're just in this horrible situation where like you start changing things, and like you could add super, I'm sure, everywhere, but no one's going to do that. It's just bad, man. I just don't like it.
Yeah. It feels like you're going through and monkey patching stuff, and that you're building something that is going to be fragile and will break at some point, like almost guaranteed. Yeah.
When you're like trying to find things, here's also another bad part. If you're meta programming in your Rails engines, oh my God, there's a place for you. I'm trying to like search everywhere for this freaking method. Where is this method? Where is it? It's not anywhere. And they're all meta programmed. And I'm like, why have you done this? So frustrating. Yeah. It's so frustrating to work on them, not necessarily to write them. I mean, there is a degree of frustration there too, but when you have to start getting in there, it's the worst. At that point, you might as well just like copy paste their code into your app.
That's like what my approach for Jumpstart Pro has been, where I want to keep as minimal set of dependencies as possible. And even something maybe like Discord's maybe not a great example because it's so simple and clean, but it's like, I know I'll be responsible for fixing bugs and whatever. So if I'm going to use a library that is unlikely to be easy for me to submit PRs to and get new releases out, then I don't want to use that library. And I'm more willing to go and pull that into my application and make it a first party thing instead, because I can probably remove a bunch of legacy stuff that's been around that I don't really need anymore because I'm on modern Rails. And that makes it simplified, but also like it's right there. So if we need to go and add a feature or fix it or whatever, can. And probably it's a lot of times too, like I'm not in love with, for example, two-factor auth. I don't really like any of the devise plugins for it. And like just built that from scratch. And it's way easier to maintain. The like sudo mode, like the little password prompt that GitHub adds, like I wrote that as a concern that, yeah, there was a gem for it, but it's also like much more meta than our version of it because ours is in the application itself and you can go find it easily and tweak it. But to tweak the gem, yeah, that's going to be way, way harder. You're going to have to override them. You're going to find a method, then override it in your controller, but it has to be done after you include that module and whatnot. Yeah, it is.
That's how I feel like it. It always starts off like, great, we have this Rails engine. It's super cool and we can use all the stuff from it. For me, at least, in all of my experiences, it's always devolved into like, now we're overriding so many things. If we had pulled it in from the beginning, we would be in a really good place. But because we're like, oh no, we can use the engine and we just like, we don't push back or we don't have an upfront, honest conversation about like, what are we going to want to change about this? Because the answer is never nothing.
Yeah. And there's some of those that are like, use devise, let it do its thing. You don't need to pull in all of devise. The other ones that you may want to go and improve or whatever, and you want to diverge from it, you may have to fork the gem and just maintain your fork, which is okay. But then at that point, you're like, is there any benefit of actually having this in a separate repo that we got to go update independently and then maintain the test suite for that separate from the test suite in our actual app and whatever? I don't know.
Yeah, it's evolving, but backwards.
Yeah, I feel you. That's definitely a thing I've experienced with that. For the most part, I try not to include any gems possible. I remember the day when I was learning Rails and I was like, oh, I want to work on an app with like 200 gems and all these dependencies. Like it'd be a big app and whatever. And then you get some experience and you're like, I want to work on a Rails app with 20 gems tops. Like that's the ideal, like something super simple. And they're all kind of modular and easy to swap in and out or whatever, like lightweight things. I don't want C extensions, makes life easier when you upgrade Ruby. And I was really surprised. The only two things I ran into in the Rails 7 branch for Jumpstart Pro was devise has a active support thing that was deprecated. There's already a PR for that. It hasn't been merged yet, but method was removed and it's not needed anymore. So that was the one thing. So I could use that branch. And then the tougher one was adder encrypted. We'd use that from the beginning and wish we were on Lockbox, but that uses a method or defines a method that's the same name as one in the Rails 7 encryption. So it is not compatible and blows up. And that one I need to, there's a fix that Austin Miller from PagerTree had written in his fork, and that works great. The only two gems that I've had to deal with that weren't like Rails 7 compatible, which I'm really surprised because there's almost always you like upgrade to Rails 7, but then there's 7 gems that are like, oh, we're capped at the current Rails version, like 6.1, because we want to explicitly not include 7. But literally everything we had in Jumpstart Pro is already open to Rails 7. And I was like, this is nice. And I think there's a lot less breaking changes in newer Rails versions. Like 7 is primarily a JavaScript and CSS upgrade. There's encryption and stuff, like some enhancements, but not any like changes to the way the backend works. So I feel like it's mature now, or I don't have to go through all these gems and fork them just to change the gem file to support some new version.
That's why I'm really glad I met Dave Camara very early on in my career. Because when I first started, just like you were talking about, like, what can I pull in from Ruby gems? Devise bootstrap views. Why not? Let's add that. And like all this stuff that like I was learning in tutorials because they were trying to get you to like pass like certain things super quickly. And I was like, oh, I can pull in this gem. I can pull in this gem. But I met Dave very early in my career. And he was like, no, none of it. He's like, if you have to add a gem, he just explained the tech debt and all these things. And I never really thought about it. I'm like, oh yeah, what about like when this happens? Because I like was still a new developer. I like had no concept of such things. But I was like, well, Dave's a really smart guy. So from that point on, I was like, as little amount of gems as possible. Nate was also like that. If someone added a gem, there was going to be a discussion about it. An argument had to be put forth. So when it comes to upgrading these things, whether it's a Rails engine or a gem, the less of them you have, the better you are.
Yeah, agreed. Have either of you started a PR for Rails 7?
Yes.
How's it going? Have you run into fun things?
I got some turbo-y things. I think I might have mentioned this last week, but there are a few turbo-y things, like, because we're using like some TurboLink submissions in a few places. And I'm like, and we use a lot of forms. And I'm basically, that's when Jason at the end of the last episode was talking about this turning off turbo. And I was like, oh, sweet, because that's what I need to do first. And then I think it pretty much is ready to go because I literally just upgraded it to Rails 6.1. So it's in a good place.
And isn't that one of the outstanding issues with Turbo right now, that the data turbo false doesn't always apply? I think that was like a bug.
Excuse me.
That Safari or something. That
no, not Safari.
Yeah, it was something like that. That I think maybe that was one of the recent commits that got merged.
Oh, it seems to be working for us, but we haven't gone 7.0.0 yet. Yeah, we were still using, Andrea did most of the putting turbo in our app. And I think she has a Rails 7 branch somewhere. I know she's like put a screenshot up of it running for Podia, but the turbo stuff, and we both use Safari religiously. I haven't noticed it. I don't think she has. So maybe we just haven't upgraded far enough yet.
Yeah. Well, what is cool is if anybody's upgrading to Rails 7 and they're not using turbo or Hotwire, should be an awfully easy upgrade. Yeah.
That's us.
It's just it's going to add some features, but it's not really going to change much for you, which is nice.
Yeah. We were using no turbo links, nothing like that. So now that we are and all we're using out of Hotwire is turbo drive right now, but it was pretty easy for us because we didn't have any legacy stuff to deal with.
No turbo links. That's a controversial stance, my friend.
Well, it was.
It's obviously paid off now, but
yeah. Who's laughing now?
Well, not me, but I love turbo links. Turbo links is great. Sorry to see it go.
I mean,
it's still here. It just lost the links.
Oh, yeah. The links is what, gave it that click at the end.
Oh, okay.
Turbo links.
So what's the new one? Turbo links and forms?
Yeah, turbo links and forms.
It's turbo links and forms and streams and frames or something like that. So Jason, as a Safari user, have you run into that bug where the CSRF token or the hidden fields can get overridden by Safari kind of seemingly at random or whatever? There's been an open issue for this for a while now. There's a PR for it that just got merged. It was when there was a hidden field, they have to add the autocomplete off attribute to those hidden fields. Otherwise, Safari just fills them out with random crap sometimes.
I'm not surprised.
I'm not surprised either.
It's really funny because it was not consistent or anything.
Has Big Sur been released? I'm using developer builds of the latest version of Apple. So I'm using the new browser and I haven't seen that.
I'm still on Big Sur, but I'm using Safari 15 and I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, I'd be interested if Chris, you have access to this. Oh, it's a Rails issue. I was going to say, if you try, I wonder if it works in Safari preview or not.
Yeah, I don't remember. I don't use Safari that often, so I haven't seen this myself. Dude. But yeah, it was there's an issue on the Mozilla tracker even or something. This is Firefox, maybe, not Safari. I'm getting my browsers confused.
Well, now I'm not. Now I'm not surprised at all. Firefox is becoming
sorry, this was a Firefox thing.
I've just lost interest.
It's too late on a Friday.
I was willing to defend Safari, but nah.
Yeah. Well, I guess they merged this fix now. So anybody who's using Firefox that ran into this obscure issue is now solved. And it was interesting because Pixel Tricks on the issues was we'd ideally just ignore this because it's not our fault. And Rails, we don't want Rails to have to work around browser bugs. Writing code where you got to write workarounds for random crap that is the worst. I was just fiddling with this the other day, but Pay uses JSON columns for database stuff, storing metadata and whatever else, credit card details and all those things, because they can be so different. And I didn't want to add fields for every single one, especially when you're not going to query on them that often. And somebody asked about MariaDB, which is, as far as I knew, was 100% compatible with MySQL, but it is very much not the case anymore. They implemented JSON columns as text columns with a validation constraint that just says is it a valid JSON string? Yes or no. But they're actually text columns. So you can't query on them and stuff the same way. It's supposed to be faster, but Rails uses the MySQL gem for that because in theory they're the same. But I started poking around the MySQL adapter and there's quite a few little places in there that are is this MariaDB? Then we need to change this and whatever. And so Rails internally has several workarounds for things with it, I guess. But that was like one of those rabbit holes of like, I could spend probably a week trying to figure out, do I need to make a PR to Rails or the MySQL gem or like a monkey patch that I just gave up on it because I was like, you know what? MariaDB broke their promise. It's not like compatible with MySQL like they say it is. So it's one of the worst parts about programming.
Wash your hands clean of that, my dude. That sounds like something no one should be involved in.
Yeah, if someone wants to give me a PR that finishes that PR, please do. But I don't think I have the willpower to work on that anymore. Especially when I made everything work with SQLite, MySQL, and Postgres. And it was like, hey, can you support MariaDB? And I was like, it already should because it's supposed to be the same. Nope. Nope. Close issue. Yeah. See you, bye. Yeah.
Change your database and then maybe you can use this.
Yeah.
I was wanting to talk about Phoenix LiveView because I read a bunch on it, but we don't have time today. So I'm going to start with that next time. That'll be my thing. I'll make sure that those gaps I have that are filling, like I'll make sure I can fill them.
This is your teaser so that people stick around to listen to the podcast. You got to subscribe
next time.
It may not be a thing people are interested in, but I'm certainly interested in it. I want to talk about it. I went down a rabbit hole this week and I'm not even like using Elixir or Phoenix. I just think it's so fascinating. So
seeing your excitement and fascination with it makes me want to know. So please do come. I'm ready. I'm sure we'll have questions.
Let go.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll see you fine folks next week. Chris, I will see you in person next week, the day after we record.
I know.
Oh,
cannot. The wife won't let me postpone the wedding rehearsal for recording our podcast. So, and we could have recorded it live at the wedding venue.
I'm gonna record it. Me and Andrew I'm just gonna be on Zoom with him.
I can get a flight rehearsal really quickly. I'm gonna crash your wedding just to like record a podcast with Jason in the corner.
It's pretty funny too because every meeting we've gone to, they're like, your last names are already the same. Like, are you already married? And we're like, yep. Like, that's what happens during COVID.
That's why I have your wedding in quotations in my calendar.
Yeah.
So.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Yep. Wedding. Yep. I mean, no one wants to give away their $5,000 in deposits or whatever. So might as well throw a party, right?
I'm excited.
It'll be fun.
I'm excited for y'all. Have fun when you're dropping it low.
Well,
on that note,
bye-bye.
Later.